Hey y'all, what is up? Keasbey here, and today we're going to be looking at my slight update to my Floowandereeze deck profile for the post-DUNE format. So up top, there hasn't been a ton of changes to the main deck. Most changes are sitting in the side deck for right now, so I'm not going to go quite as in-depth on a lot of stuff that I've already covered previously in this, and I'm going to more or less keep it to the basics. If you are new to the deck though, and do want to check out a much more in-depth explanation on everything, please check out my previous deck profile or my Floowandereeze rulings and tips videos, all of which can be found in the Floowandereeze playlist on the channel. But before we get into all that, don't forget to drop this video a like and subscribe to the channel for even more. So up top, we are still absolutely blinding second with this list, so let's get that started with triple copies of Floowandereeze and Rabina. Rabina on normal summon allows you to add a level 4 or lower winged beast from your deck to your hand, then after that effect resolves, you can normal summon a winged beast from your hand. That normal summon after resolution applies to all our small birds, so I won't repeat it for each one. Just remember that it does happen. She's our 1-card start and absolutely needed at 3. One additional note that applies to all the little birdos: if they were to leave the field in any way bound for any destination, they are banished face up instead, and if they are currently banished and a winged beast is normal summoned, you can return them to your hand. All the effects of these small birds are hard once per turns. Next up, we're on 3 copies of Floowandereeze and Eaglin. Eaglin on normal summon allows you to add a level 7 or higher winged beast from your deck to your hand. Also at 3, as we do want access to Eaglin at the majority of different points in the game. Following that, we are on 1 copy of Floowandereeze and Stree, and Floowandereeze and Toucan. Stree targets a card in either graveyard and banishes it, and Toucan can target a banished Floowandereeze card and add it back to your hand. We are only playing one of each, as they aren't ideal for starting with and don't give you access to more resources in and of themselves. Rather, they allow you to loop your resources that your other birds can help you get into rotation. That's it for all the small birds. Let's get into the big birds with 2 copies of Floowandereeze and Empen. So Empen has a lot to talk about, so again, please check out some of the videos from the playlist that are on screen right now for the ins and outs of how her effect works and interacts with other monsters. So first off, when she's normal summoned, you can add a Floowandereeze spell or trap from your deck to hand, then normal summon any monster, not just a winged beast. This does come up with one of our side deck cards mostly. Next, as long as you control a tribute summon Empen, your opponent cannot activate the effects of special summon monsters that are in attack position. Without going into a deep dive on this effect, I do just want to emphasize that there's a huge distinction between preventing the activation of effects, which Empen does, and negating effects, which Empen does not. And lastly, when Empen battles, attacked, or attacking, during the damage step, you can banish a card from your hand for cost to half the attack and defense of whatever Empen is currently battling. Most important to remember about Empen is that no part of her effect is a once per turn at all, and remember, Stream Toucan can be used to loop Empen multiple times in a single turn. Next up, we're on 1 copy of Mist Valley Apex Avian. Once per chain, when a card or effect is activated, you can target a Mist Valley card you control, so in the case of this deck itself, bounce it back to the hand, and if you do, negate the activation and destroy the card in question. While this is once per chain, it is not once per turn. Very important to remember because we can summon Apex Avian multiple times per turn. Secondly, I do need to mention that Apex has to successfully make it back to the hand in order to perform the negation. Following that up, we're on 1 copy of Ryza the Mega Monarch. Ryza on Tribute Summon targets a card on field and in either graveyard and spins them back to the top of their respective decks in any order. Then as a second portion of the same effect, if you tributed a wind monster as part of the summon, you can target an additional card on field and bounce it back to the hand. A few very important things to note: Ryza can self-target to reset for multiple uses in a single turn, as he is not once per turn in any way. Something I will mention here as well, as I haven't really mentioned it enough, Ryza's effect is mandatory, and for part 1, the spin to the top of the deck portion of the effect, it must target both a card on field and in graveyard in order to resolve properly. This means that if there is no card in graveyard, while Ryza will activate, the spin portion of the effect will resolve without effect. However, if you tributed a wind monster as part of the summon, you will still be able to resolve the bounce to hand effect afterwards. Last thing to mention, Ryza can be tribute summoned with one monster if you tribute a previously tribute summoned monster in order to summon him. Generally, this will be M-Pen, and this does come up very, very, very often, so keep it in mind. That's it for the birds. Let's talk hand traps. We're only on 3 currently, and those are 3 copies of Dimension Shifter. D-Shifter is remarkably strong, and while it is pretty useless against Kashtira aside from blanking out the use of Droll and Lockbird, it works very well against a great deal of other decks, worst case acting as a 1-for-1 or 1-for-2 trade. Bonus, it makes Toucan significantly stronger as it banishes all our Floowandereeze cards after they are used. Alrighty, let's talk spells and traps. First, we're on 3 copies of Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map. Map allows you to reveal a level 1 Floowandereeze monster in your hand, banish a Floowandereeze card from your deck, and then immediately after that effect resolves, normal summon the revealed monster. Next, when your opponent normal summons a monster, you can activate Map's trigger effect, and then immediately after that resolves, normal summon a Floowandereeze monster from your hand. This second effect actually works on either player's turn, important for the mirror match. One very important thing I will mention here, despite both of the effects being hard once per turns, the activation of Map itself is not. So if it's removed from the field prior to using either effect and you have another copy in hand, you can just reactivate it a second time. There's a lot more I could say about this card here, but please see the video on screen later for more info on the ins and outs of this incredibly strong card. Next up, we have map number 4, Terraforming. This is essentially our 41st card in the deck, so if you do really want to drop to 40 cards exactly, you can either remove this or the next card, but as they both do help a lot with the consistency of this deck, I do recommend keeping this. And we're going to break from the Floowandereeze stuff for a moment and talk about a miniature copy of map, Gold Sarcophagus. I love Gold Sarc for this deck, as it allows any of our small birds to be 1-card starters by banishing another bird from the deck. Also, it can allow for a chain block, which can be very important in some instances as well. It's another candidate for the quote-unquote 41st card, and if you are really that desperate to hit the 40 card mark, I would keep Terraforming over this, as while this is a great one-time instant map, Terraforming does represent a full map. Okay, back on the Floowandereeze stuff, we're looking at 3 copies of Floowandereeze and the Advent of Adventure. When I say Advent makes this deck work, I am not exaggerating. So on quick play speed, banish either a winged beast from your hand or field, add either a Floowandereeze monster or field spell from your deck to your hand. This does a ton. The banish is a cost, so it dodges targeted negations, and worst case, it's extra map access, which we always do want. Absolutely must be on 3 of this card. Following that up, we're on 1 copy of Floowandereeze and the Unexplored Winds, so a ton to talk about with this card that I'm not deep diving into here, but please see the video on screen if you want to learn more about the insanity that is this card. Okay, so the easy effect. Once per turn, you can reveal up to 2 winged beasts from your hand, place them at the bottom of the deck in any order, and then draw that many cards. One very important need to know about this is that the reveal and draw are part of the resolution of this card. So if your opponent does want to ash, they need to do so 1, before they know what you're revealing, and 2, before they know how many cards you're revealing. Also, if this gets ashed and you have Prosperity, you can use Prosperity afterwards since you never actually drew. More on that in a moment. Second, the big weird effect. If you would perform a tribute summon requiring 2 tributes exactly, you can, instead of tributing, send 1 monster you control and 1 card your opponent controls to the graveyard to perform that tribute summon. Okay, the quick keynotes on this. This does not activate, it just happens, essentially turning a resolving Eaglin into instant removal. This is not a cost, but rather an effect. Therefore, it does not conflict with Dimension Shifter. And lastly, while it is treated as a tribute summon, you will get Rise's Spin to the deck effect, but since no cards are actually being tributed here, rather just sent to grave, you will not get the bonus bounce to hand effect afterwards. Bonus, however, you can do this as many times per turn as you can perform a 2 tribute summon. Okay, double bonus, from an open game state, and only from an open game state, you can tribute set using this card. Doing this in a bit of a weird order, we're going to cover the last in archetype card here, Floowandereeze and the Dreaming Town. Dreaming Town has 2 effects. The first is a placeholder effect that doesn't actually do anything, but on the resolution of that effect, you can normal summon a level 4 lower winged beast from your hand. This isn't limited to Floowandereeze monsters, but for this build, it's all we're going to be able to use it for. This is what gives us a lot of control play on our opponent's turn, especially coupled with the second effect on this card. If you perform a tribute summon while this card is in the graveyard, you can banish it for cost and flip all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls face down. Really strong effect. Bonus is that it banishes itself for cost here, so it can be looped with Toucan for later uses. It can also chain block for your M-Pen or Ryza as well if need be. Not once per turn on the first part that summons, but a hard once per turn on the Book of Eclipse effect, however. Only one copy for that reason, as we are limited in our small bird activations, unfortunately. Now we're on to the third-party accessories for this deck with a new addition in Pot of Extravagance. So Extrav is a card I don't super like, but with the way we've kind of restructured the deck, that extra little bit of consistency boosting does come into play. So it can only be used at the start of main phase 1, which is a pretty big detriment as we can't clear interactions before firing this off. Although if we open anything else that we really do want to resolve, it is a pretty big target for Ash Blossom or other forms of interaction, so it's not terrible at baiting those out. So Extrav, you banish 3 or 6 cards from your extra deck face down at random, draw 1 or 2 cards respectively. It is a +1 generally, which is nice, but I always prefer Prosperity over this. Slight difference between the no draw after using this card restriction and the no draw after using Prosperity restriction that does come up sometimes in this deck is that the extra restriction is tied to the resolution of this card. So if it gets hit with Ash Blossom or something like that, we actually still have access to the draw effect on Unexplored Winds later on in the turn, whereas the restriction on Prosperity is tied to the activation of the card itself. So if Prosperity is ashed, we still cannot draw via Winds later in the turn. Just one copy of this because any more felt like a bit too much with the rest of everything else that we've got going on in the deck. Following that, we are on triple copies of the aforementioned Pot of Prosperity. Banish 3 or 6 cards from your extra deck face down, you get to choose for this one. Excavate that many cards from the top of the deck and add one of them to your hand, putting the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. A great interaction to be aware of: if you fire off Extrav at the start of your main phase 1 and it gets ashed or negated in any way, you can still follow up with a Pot of Prosperity since you didn't actually end up drawing cards off of the Extrav. The restriction of not being able to use this the turn you've already drawn is tied to actually drawing via an effect, not just attempting to do so. We go for the 6 reveal like 99% of the time. Next up, triple copies of Pot of Duality, a free miniature version of Prosperity that you shuffle the remaining cards into the deck instead of placing them on the bottom afterwards. It does prevent you from special summoning for the turn and vice versa, which in this deck is barely an issue, but it is important to keep in mind for the rare instances where we do need to dip into the extra deck. Okay, so now we're on to what I'm affectionately dubbing the "wow, nice deck, asshole" portion of the deck, so named as that's generally the Edo Pro response to blinding second and slamming these cards down. First up, we're on 2 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust. This is a new addition to the deck from the last profile, and it is functionally a conditional extra 2 copies of any of our normal spells and traps. Unlike talents, this is procced by an opponent using an effect at any point in the turn, not just the main phase. It is really strong going first or second, although going first we are limited to really using it to get Dreaming Town or another card later into rotation, since we can only set the card if our opponent doesn't have a monster on the field. Additionally, that set card cannot be used the turn it is set. But going second, generally we'll be looking at a board with monsters, so our option tree grows quite a bit, since we can then add it to our hand and activate it during that turn. A few quick notes: regardless of if you intend to set or add to hand, your opponent can ash this card even if they control no monsters at the time of activation, since the check for if your opponent has monsters or not happens on resolution. Also meaning that if they have a monster on the activation of Thrust but somehow cycle it off the field before Thrust resolves, you can then only set. This is because there's always a chance that during the chain, the game state could change in a way where you could add to hand or not add to hand. However, because you can always choose to set, you can resolve this under Droll. You just obviously are forced to set from there. Again, just a really good flexible card that has absolutely been putting in work. Following that up, 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. Not a ton to say about this that hasn't already been said. I will mention here, we went back up to 3 from 2, as I think the meta has shifted in a way where we just really need consistent access to being able to crack a board at all times. So With 3 of these and 2 thrust, we're conditionally playing 5 copies of Dark Ruler no more. Next up, 3 evenly matched. So evenly is remarkably strong, however it doesn't have the same no monster response clause that Dark Ruler no more has, but it can't be denied that this is just absolutely a beast of a card going second. Again, we're on 3 for the same reason as above, technically 5 because of thrust. One huge note though about both of these cards, neither are once per turn in any way. It doesn't come up terribly often with Dark Ruler no more, but with evenly, it does occur if the first one is negated, or if our opponent rebuilds while still in the battle phase, and you can just go ahead and fire off a second copy. And last but not least, in the new additions from the previous profile, 1 main deck copy of Harpy's Featherstorm. This is primarily in here as a target for triple tactics thrust if we go first, or if we go second and we don't need to search anything else off of it. Just kind of the easy button of the deck if we get access to it in a simplified game state. Don't forget, as with all of our third-party accessory cards, we can loop this with Ryza. Okay, that's it for the main deck, so just a few minor updates and ratio changes, nothing major. Let's speed through the extra deck as it is more or less identical. I'll just cover the utility quickly of what each card is in here for, and again, the previous deck profile will go a lot more in depth as to why and what all these cards do. First off, our Xyz package, we're on 1 Assembled Nightingale, 1 Promenade Thrush, and 1 Recital Starling. Nightingale can attack directly, Promenade Thrush is situational back row removal, and Recital Starling is a rarely used win condition that I think has only really come up once. All of these are here because they are rank 1s that ladder up into Downerd Magician. Downerd has an effect that I don't think I've ever fully read, but it can rank up over the rank 1s so that we can get an extra material for Divine Arsenal AA Zeus. Yeah, I know, technically it's Zeus, but I don't care. This comes up, funnily enough, mostly in the mirror matches, but even then, rarely if ever. Next, 2 Link 1s, Relinquished Anima, and Salamangreat Almirage. Anima punishes bad monster placement and is a dark for laddering up further. Almirage is just a fire attribute for laddering up and adding more potential attributes for spoilers for later. Next up, 3 Charmers, Dark, Wind, and Fire. Fire is a newer addition, she can grab an opponent's ash to ladder up, Dark is a fairly common attribute, and Wind we can make natively. You can also run Water in here as well, but I find Wind to be a bit more commonplace of an attribute between Wind and Water. 2 additional Link 2s in Codebreaker Virus Swordsman and Nightmare Phoenix. Codebreaker outs Baguska, and Phoenix is a rarely used out to some floodgates that we can use our Link 1s to ladder up into and go under the effects. Next up, Selene, Queen of the Master Magician. Something I do want to mention, I have a video all about using the extra deck in Floowandereeze. It is older, and there is one major illegal play in it. You cannot summon the Charmers back via Selene. It is pinned in a comment there as well mentioning that you cannot do this, but otherwise definitely check out that video for more details on these extra deck plays. Keep in mind, Dimension Shifter is a spellcaster that we can summon out with her if need be. And at the end of that link ladder, we have the access code Talker. Comes up once in a while, fun note, an access code made with Selena, and either an M-Pen or Apex Avion add up to exactly 8,000 life points. Always have to mention this, access code can banish himself for cost. This has come up more than once. And above the link ladder itself, we have the Link 5 Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. She is here to out any Towers types monsters that we don't otherwise have convincing outs for. Okay, that is the extra deck. Let's talk about the side deck, so a decent amount of change here. Let's kick it off with 3 Droll and Lockbirds. So the theory is we are a blind second deck, but there are some cases where board breakers aren't great, and we'd rather just stop a board altogether. Droll is exceptionally good in cases like that. Additionally as well, we can slot this in over Dimension Shifter in matchups where Shifter isn't solid, as can the next card in our side deck as well. Speaking of, this does conflict with Dimension Shifter, but in cases where we are slotting both in, it will be in games where both Dimension Shifter and Droll are just as effective as the other in stopping a board. Plus, Floowandereeze has means of clearing out the graveyard anyway, so you can Droll turn 1, clear your graveyard, and then fire off Dimension Shifter afterwards. Next up, we're on 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So this can also be infinite impermanence if you like, but I've found that Ash gives you a bit more flexibility in what you can react to as a trade-off for imperm not proccing either triple tactic, talent, or thrust. A fun note about Ash Blossom and D-Shifter, Shifter actually prevents Ash from being hit with Called by the Grave, since under Shifter it will bypass the graveyard entirely and go directly to being banished. We bring this in going first as well, as in cases where we want more prevention than board breaking, as it can make our big Floowandereeze interactions more potent or let us put off using them until they are much more impactful in the turn. Following that, 2 copies of Denko Sekka. I just love this card. You could run Dark Simorgh over her, as Simorgh is searchable within the deck, but I actually have a video comparing the two, and I think Denko is just so much stronger of a card that it offsets the searchability that Simorgh offers. While we're hating on back row, 1 Feather Duster. So this has been in the main deck here for a while, and it is a very good triple tactics thrust target, but swapping it out for more digging power in the main deck for other board breakers has been working really well as well, and I haven't really missed it in the main deck, as we do also run the 3 copies of Evenly Matched in there as well. Next up, 2 Cosmic Cyclones. So I'm down from 3, as between the Dusters, the Denkos, and the aforementioned Evenlies in the main deck, we do run a ton of back row hate. Plus again, triple tactics thrust technically makes Duster a conditional 3 of, so 2 Cosmics has felt fine. The bigger purpose for this card is honestly to hit floodgates at quick play speed so that they can't interrupt our plays. Let's round out a playset now with 2 copies of Harpy's Featherstorm. We bring these in when we're going first for better odds of seeing it, and so that we don't have to worry so much about banishing one off Dimension Shifter and losing the ability to loop it throughout the rest of the game. And finally, 2 copies of Solemn Judgment, just a good be-all, end-all answer to a lot of different threats. So this has been the update to the deck. A bit longer than I intended, but definitely way shorter than my other lists. I'll add an overlay right now of the deck so that y'all can screenshot it if you'd like. Again, I mentioned a lot of other videos in there where I do go much more in depth, so if you are newer to the deck and finding this, definitely check those out and the whole Floowandereeze playlist as we go really in depth in our other videos. But I did want to streamline this a bit more since the updates to it are admittedly pretty minor. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop it a like and subscribe to the channel for even more, and I will catch you all later.